On 28 November 1720, two women stood trial at St. Jago de la Vega in Jamaica. They were convicted of piracy. They were sentenced to death. At the last moment, they spoke a sentence that stopped the gallows. They were quick with child. And Bonny, Mary Read. Nearly everything the world later remembered about them began not in that courtroom, but in a book printed 4 years later. The trial record is short. Johnson's 1724 history is not. That gap is the case. The case begins before the courtroom in the Bahamas. On the 5th September 1720, Governor Woodes Rogers issued a proclamation against John Rackham and his company. In the Boston Gazette printing of that proclamation, two women are named with the crew, Anne Fulford alias Bonny and Mary Read. They were not a secret in that official notice. They were listed as part of the company that had taken the sloop William from New Providence on 22nd August. That matters because one later version of the story depends on hidden identities. Johnson's account likes disclosure scenes. A woman mistaken for a man, a lover confused, a captain jealous, a private secret revealed inside a crowded ship. The proclamation is colder. It names two women. It names the sloop. It names the guns. It names the theft. The William was not a grand warship. The proclamation described a small sloop, about 12 tons, mounted with 4 great guns and 2 swivels, with ammunition, sails, rigging, anchor, cables, and a canoe. A small vessel, a small crew, a short career, and then a record that grew larger after the fact. By late October, the case had reached Jamaica. Governor Nicholas Laws wrote to the Council of Trade and Plantations on 13th of November. He reported that Jonathan Barnett, commanding a well-manned trading sloop, had taken Rackham at the leeward part of the island. Laws counted Rackham and 18 more, now in jail, and said he meant to try them under the Piracy Commission. Jamaica wanted an example. St. Jago de la Vega was the colonial capital, the place where piracy became paper. Commissions read aloud, prisoners arraigned, witnesses sworn, sentences copied, notices sent outward. The same town could turn a chase at sea into a legal fact that London would understand. On 16th of November, Rackham and the male prisoners faced trial. The printed notices report guilty verdicts and executions. The bodies of condemned pirates were displayed around Port Royal and Kingston as warnings. That punishment shaped the room Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read entered 12 days later. By 28th of November, the public example had already begun. The trial of the women is written like a proceeding, not a romance. Mary Read and Anne Bonny, alias Bon, were indicted for piracy, robbery, and felony on the high sea. The indictment placed the offense near Negril Point within the jurisdiction of the court. Both pleaded not guilty. Then the witnesses came in. Dorothy Thomas, captured while traveling in a canoe with stock and provisions on the north side of Jamaica, gave the detail the transcript remembers. She said the two women were on Rackham's sloop in men's jackets, long trousers, and handkerchiefs tied about their heads. She described weapons in their hands. She said they urged the men to kill her so she could not testify. This is the rare place where the record becomes vivid, and the vividness belongs to a witness, not to Johnson. The trial does not need an origin story to make the women legible. It needs Dorothy Thomas in a canoe, a sloop taking her goods, and two prisoners at the bar whom she could identify. Other witnesses narrowed the legal question. John Bestneck and Peter Cornelian described the two women as active on board. They said Anne Bonny handed gunpowder to the men. They said the women wore men's clothes when the crew chased or attacked a vessel, and women's clothes at other times. Thomas Dillon described them as willing to do anything on board. The trial's strongest fact is this: the women were not convicted because a pamphlet liked the spectacle of female pirates. They were convicted because witnesses placed them inside the labor of the crew, armed, dressed for action, handing powder, present during captures. Then comes the legal turn. After conviction, the court pronounced the ordinary sentence of death. The printed record says both women pleaded that they were quick with child. The court ordered a jury of matrons to examine them. The execution was stayed. The law did not acquit them. It delayed the sentence. That delay is one reason the legend could grow. Rackham died quickly. The male crew largely disappears into execution notices in colonial correspondence. Mary Read died in prison in 1721, according to the later parish record tradition. Anne Bonny's official trail thins out. Absence became an opening. Johnson walked into it. Here is the source anatomy. The records say Anne Bonny and Mary Read were named in the 1720 proclamation, tried together on 28 November, identified by witnesses, convicted, sentenced, and reprieved after pleading pregnancy. Johnson's 1724 history adds the long lives before the trial. No trial transcript, colonial letter, or contemporary newspaper opened for this packet confirms those lives. Johnson's Mary Read chapter begins not with piracy, but with her mother's deception. A dead boy, a girl raised as a boy, a grandmother's allowance, a child placed in male clothes, then service as a footboy, a sailor, a soldier, a comrade, a wife, a widow, and then a return to men's dress. It is a complete life. It is also a life without independent contemporary support. Johnson's Anne Bonny chapter is stranger. The woman the chapter claims to explain barely appears for long stretches. The story starts with her father's marriage, his servant, stolen spoons, mistaken beds, a pregnancy, a move to Carolina, and then Anne's later life with Rackham. It reads less like a file and more like a comic plot that has drifted into a pirate book. Johnson's book is not a forged document sitting outside history. It is part of history. It shaped how later readers imagined pirates, how engravers posed them, how novels borrowed them, and how modern summaries still arrange the facts. The problem is not that Johnson should be erased. The problem is that Johnson should be labeled. Once he is labeled, the story changes. Mary Read's soldier life becomes a claim from Johnson's 1724 history. Anne Bonny's Cork parentage becomes a claim from Johnson's 1724 history. The jail door insult becomes a claim from Johnson's 1724 history. The trial testimony becomes something else, a contemporary proceeding with named witnesses and a legal consequence. Johnson wants the reader to trust him. In the preface, he insists that the lives may seem extravagant, but are true, and that people in Jamaica heard their stories after their sex was discovered. That claim is exactly where the source problem begins. The trial pamphlet does not record those confessions. The official record does not preserve that interview. Johnson gives us certainty where the archive gives us silence. I cannot find a contemporary record that verifies Johnson's most famous Bonny scene. The line about Rackham fighting like a man and not hanging like a dog appears in Johnson. The trial record does not preserve it. The execution notice does not preserve it. It may be a story Johnson heard. It may be a scene he shaped. In the script of history, it is Johnson's line, not the court's. That does not make Johnson useless. It makes him dangerous in a specific way. He often knew the public record. He used trial papers, newspaper notices, and official events. Then he wrapped them in private scenes no clerk could have recorded. The reader gets a spine made from record and flesh made from theater, and after 3 centuries, the two are hard to separate. The midpoint turn is this. The case is not mainly about whether 2 women were unusually brave. The trial already says enough to put them on Rackham's sloop and inside its work. The larger question is why the part with the strongest evidence became the shortest part of the story, while the unverified part became the portrait. One answer is commercial. A trial pamphlet could sell a proceeding. Johnson sold lives. He gave readers what the courtroom could not give: childhood, motives, hidden romance, private disclosure, moral commentary, a final scene. He turned 2 defendants into literary characters. That is the mechanism by which a footnote becomes a legend. The other answer is gender. The court cared about whether the prisoners had committed piracy. Johnson cared about why female pirates were imaginable. His chapters keep returning to clothes, sex, marriage, disclosure, and pregnancy because those were the anxieties that made the story marketable. The trial asks whether they were part of the crew. Johnson asks what kind of women could become this. A useful visual way to hold the case is 2 columns. In the left column, 22nd of August, the William, 5th of September, Rogers' proclamation, late October, Barnett's capture, 28th of November, the trial, the pregnancy plea. In the right column, Mary as a soldier in Flanders. Anne's father and the spoons, the secret disclosures, the lover protected in a duel, the final insult at the jail door. The left column is the record. The right column is Johnson unless another source can carry it. The episode has to keep returning to that table because this is exactly where popular history slips. A single sentence can cross the line. And Bonny told Rackham. Mary Read served in Flanders. Didn't you know? The women hid their sex from the crew. Each may be familiar. Familiarity is not verification. There is also a smaller record detail that cuts against the romance of disguise. The proclamation names Mary Read and Anne Fulford, alias Bonny, as women before the trial. Witnesses describe them wearing men's clothes during action and women's clothes at other times. That is not the same as a ship fooled by two perfect disguises. The contemporary record suggests flexible presentation, not universal concealment, so the reconstruction stays narrow. In August 1720, Rackham's company took the William from New Providence. In September, Rogers named the company and declared them enemies of the crown. By late October, Barnett captured them near Jamaica. On 16th of November, Rackham and the male prisoners were condemned. On 20th November, Bonny and Read were tried, convicted, sentenced, and reprieved. The narrow reconstruction is not small because the women were unimportant. It is small because the surviving record is disciplined by the needs of law. The law preserved charges, witnesses, verdicts, and punishments. It did not preserve their inner lives. Johnson filled that absence, and most later storytellers preferred the filling to the absence. The afterlife of the case proves the point. Later images fix them in dramatic poses. Later accounts turn them into symbols, lovers, rebels, or icons, depending on the century doing the telling. Some of those uses are understandable. The record is sparse and the lives behind it matter. But understandable is not the same as sourced. This is why the trial transcript is the anchor. It is thin, but its thinness is evidence. It shows what the state needed to know to kill them and what it did not need to know. It needed Dorothy Thomas, John Besnick, Peter Cornelian, Thomas Dillon, a sloop, a charge, and a verdict. It did not need a childhood. The legend needed the childhood. The court made prisoners. Johnson made protagonists. The court recorded enough to condemn them. Johnson wrote enough for readers to remember them. When we confuse those two acts, we stop reading the record and start reading the market. The case did not begin with the famous insult at the jail door. It began with a small sloop, a proclamation, and a court record that had no room for a legend. The trial is the key noun because the trial is where the evidence stops. Everything after it has to tell us where it came from. Bonny and Mary Read survived in history because Johnson gave them portraits. But the portraits are not the transcript. The transcript is shorter, colder, and less satisfying. That is exactly why it matters.